Okay, good morning, guys. Getting ready for the session. Actually, we've got a bit of green on the screen, and it is a bit, but we do have some upside on some of these risk assets. A bit of upside for sterling, and actually, let me bring in my sterling chart. Just give me one second. So, yeah, you got a little bit of respite this morning. How long that's going to last remains to be seen. This is the chart for cable, as you can see, and as you of course know, 31-year low. Just looking at the ultra long term, you go back to the mid 80s to find the last time cable. We're trading at these levels. That's the pound against the dollar, of course. If we just kind of zoom in on a daily chart. And whilst this is just refreshing, we've generally had a little bit of pause for thought, let's say, across the global market system overnight. And we've seen equities being marginally higher. We've seen sterling being marginally higher. We've got oil prices on the up. And we've got even markets just touch pressure. Obviously, all these markets are still, or most of them are still right out on extremes with this daily chart for sterling against the dollar. We're still down 133. We've still collapsed, and that has not changed. But a little bit of pause breath. The S&P is doing a decent job. If I just take this chart, we're just pushing, we're back up above the 2,000 handle, trading 2005, and actually looking at having a go at getting back to Monday's opening levels up at 2010-ish, or a bit higher, 2013 actually. But a little bit of calmness. We've got, an interesting day ahead. Obviously, Brexit still dominates. We do have some data, but you can pretty much largely forget about the economic data at this point. So, what is on the slate? What's on the calendar for today with regards to any more developments? What's going to happen to the UK? What's going to happen to global markets? So definitely an important day because Cameron makes his way across to the European or the EU summit, which is a 2-day meeting, starts today. And let me show you the schedule for this because this could be important. And I just want to touch on the idea that actually maybe Britain aren't going to leave the EU after all. Here's the schedule for today at the EU summit. So arrival are at 3 p.m. Okay, now here you tend to get some what we describe as doorstep comments. This is leaders arriving at the summit. This is where the press pack are waiting and trying to gain any kind of snippet, any kind of throwaway comments. So we might get some comments here at 3 p.m. this afternoon. We've just got a debate in the European Parliament, starts at 4. The ironically named family photo is at 4:30. And then we've got the first working session, and then followed by the kind of dinner tonight. Now, Cameron is involved today. What happens tomorrow is Cameron basically gets kicked out, and here's the schedule for tomorrow. Here we now at 9 a.m. having had some arrivals and more comments. 9 a.m. There's an informal meeting between 27 heads of state. That's 28 minus 1. Cameron not invited to the Wednesday. So certainly an important day today and tomorrow to really gauge where we go now. I would say it's the first time the UK talks to the EU. The first time there's some dialogue, and are we going to get any kind of sense of what the next steps are? Let me take that off screenshot. Obviously, for now, the situation is that Cameron's resigned. He made a speech in Parliament yesterday saying that we need to go ahead and deliver the wish of the people, and we need to go ahead and exit. However, I'm not going to be actioning the Article 50, the exit clause in the EU treaty. I'm going to leave that to my successor, and my successor will be decided by the 2nd of September. Okay, so this is now a date we've got, looks to be confirmed. So, is Boris Johnson going to be Prime Minister by the time we get to the 2nd of September? Now, let's just take a step back. Are we going to actually leave here? Because there's a bit of a precedent, or there's a couple of precedents here, which we need to consider. And here's a comment from Boris Johnson himself back in February, because he's always been what's considered to be, let's say, reluctant Leave campaigner. It's most likely he joined the Leave for his own gain, in terms of that was probably his quickest path becoming Prime Minister. If he managed to actually pull off a Leave win, which he has, then it looks like Johnson's personal plan of being PM couldn't be going any better. Here's what Johnson said in February. There's only one way to get the change we need, talking about the changes that Cameron was trying to negotiate with the EU before the referendum, changes that he really failed to get, and that's why really ultimately we voted to leave. Boris Johnson said there's only one way to get the change we need, and that is to vote to go, because all EU history shows that they only really listen to a population when it says no. Two things to be aware of. In 1992, Denmark voted to reject the Maastricht Treaty. In 2001, and then again in 2008, in 2001, Ireland rejected the Nice Treaty, and in 2008, Ireland rejected the Lisbon Treaty. What happened? The Danes and the Irish, having had referendums where they voted no, the EU basically rolled over and gave these two countries concessions. These two countries then had second votes and voted in. So there's precedent here. I actually think this is the way forward. I actually think this is going to happen. This is my opinion. I just think the negotiating process and the ramifications of the country, size of the UK leaving the EU, are catastrophic for the EU. I don't think there's any appetite in the EU for Britain to leave, and the thought of trying to negotiate it is enough to, just see all politicians on both sides just resign, as Cameron has done, and just let somebody else deal with this, because the thought of us dealing with it, I just can't. So I actually think that what's going to happen here is Britain actually just give themselves a huge amount of negotiating power at the table. I actually think we're going to get some kind of concessions on some kind of control or cap on, or some kind of limit on migration from the EU, and this might then be the trigger point. But I don't know whether it needs another referendum or whether the government says, look, we've made concessions. We've won concessions from the EU, and that's enough for us to say, right, look, we're not going to leave. So I don't know. I personally think this might well be the outcome. Now, this does not mean that markets are now going to rally hard, because even if I'm right, that's going to take months to actually probably get decided. And however, I would say that today's meetings with Cameron and the EU are particularly important for any kind of hint that the EU are prepared to make concessions and give the UK what they want, in an effort to try and backtrack and in an effort to see the UK stay in the EU. I think today's very important. Now, as it stands, we're getting a little bit of lift on risk assets, and there's a little bit of interest in this. Of course, yesterday was carnage again. Certainly some major sectors getting hammered. Here's a few charts. Hang on a sec. Let me just engineer these into screenshot. So some sectors in particular have got heavily damaged off the back of this. It's the FTSE 250 that's taken the huge brunt of this carnage. So just give me 1 second here. FTSE 250 is down about 15%. So this is the vote. FTSE 100 is actually down only about 5%. Some sectors have got annihilated. EasyJet here, who's rebounding 3% up today, but unfortunately then they're 35% down since Thursday close. The travel sector getting absolutely hammered. Here's Foxton's share price, down also about 35% since Thursday's close. Generally, home builders, anybody involved in housing, selling or the building of houses in the UK, been heavily damaged. There's an expectation the UK housing market is going to really suffer as we get. Even if I'm right and we don't leave, there's certainly going to be a several months worth, at the very least, of heightened uncertainty. We got credit rating agencies downgrading the UK, a double downgrade yesterday, although ironically UK bond yields moved to a record ever low. But here's the housing market getting annihilated, and then banks. These are the other ones that have borne the brunt of this. This is RBS getting slammed. All these markets are up this morning, but only very, very marginally. This is the lowest RBS have traded since the very height of the crisis. Don't forget that we, the taxpayer, we own 4% of this. So thanks Boris for basically shaving multiple billions off our share ownership of banks here. But look, so the banks, housing sector, anything to do with the housing sector, anything to do with travel, these have been heavily damaged. Is this opportunity though? Obviously, from a trader and investor's point of view, any kind of violent movement, there's opportunity in here if you're prepared to be patient, if you're prepared to be brave. The opportunity is perhaps not quite yet, but as things settle, and maybe if there's any hit this afternoon that Cameron might be able to get some kind of concession on migration, then that could be pretty significant. And picking up some of these share prices that have been absolutely collapsed could be an interesting thing to be mindful of. But I think it's too early to say this, or it's definitely too early to say this carnage is over. What's going to be important from an economic data point of view will be Friday. We get the latest UK manufacturing PMI number for the month of June, and this will be the first kind of data point that might just about have some Brexit influence in it. I mean, it's already dropped pre-Brexit vote down to around 50. We had April a sub 50 reading for the first time in many years. We edged back up above 50 in May, but if you get a sharp correction lower in the manufacturing PMI, that's a surefire lead indicator that actually we are going to get a genuine move to an economic contraction scenario. So just get that out of the way. So look, let's go through today's session with the idea that at the moment we're just getting a little bit of a bounce on risk. I think we've got some important prices to keep an eye on. If you're looking at oil, look at my daily chart, top right for crude oil. Here we've got a double bottom now, a really important one for the month of June. If I just zoom in on that, obviously oil's still up there. I mean, we're still around, well, I guess in sight of that higher year we set back at the start of the month, but massive double bottom here, 45.83. So that was Friday's. That was yesterday's low, matching the low we had pre-vote mid-June. Now we've lifted again this morning. Obviously, this is global demand concerns leading to a sharp sell-off in crude oil. We'll see if things are stabilising here a little bit. On the oil front, we're going to be back to looking at API and Department of Energy numbers, of course. Now, we need to see what the response is going to be from central banks. What are the Bank of England going to do? What are the Bank of Japan going to do in the face of a sharp appreciation of the yen? We've seen Korea's government issue some fiscal stimulus program. Osborne's been talking this morning, and he's basically been saying, look, we're going to have to announce more austerity measures. We're going to have to raise tax. We're going to have to cut spending. If we slide into a recession, then of course this is going to be incredibly negative for the government's aims of trying to balance the budget within this parliament. Osborne has also just now, in the last hour or so, ruled himself out of the Tory leadership race. but he's confirmed that in the budget, he said we're not going to have an emergency budget, but in the autumn budget, we're almost going to certainly have to have tax rises and spending cuts. And if we're in a recession, of course, that's just obviously not going to help. Fiscal stimulus is the way to get out of a recession. It's just that, really still our fiscal health is not quite what it needs to be. It's not healthy enough to kind of be aggressive in any stimulative way. So that's interesting from Osborne this morning. But for now, let's get on with it. We've got the EU summit to look forward to this afternoon. For now, slight respite. Let's see how long that lasts. Right, enjoy the session.